All right, we're diving into the final chapters of the biblical book of Judges, and let's just say things get pretty chaotic. I mean, downright disturbing. Forget heroes. This is the story of a society in a complete and total freefall.
Now this one sentence you see here, it pops up 4 times in these last few chapters. And honestly, it's the key to understanding everything. It's like the author's final diagnosis for what's gone so terribly wrong. You see, the standard has completely shifted. They're not even trying to do what's right in God's eyes anymore. Nope, everyone is just doing what feels right to them. And that is an absolute recipe for disaster.
So you might be wondering, why stick these, well, pretty sordid and tawdry stories right here at the end? Chronologically, they probably happened way earlier in the timeline of the Judges. But you see, the author is making a very deliberate choice here. He's placing them at the very end for one powerful reason: to show us the absolute rock bottom of Israel's moral and spiritual decay.
And this is where things get really interesting. You look at the first big chunk of the book, right? It's all about external threats. Israel is fighting off the Philistines, the Moabites, outside enemies. But then you hit these last few chapters and the whole game changes. The problem isn't out there anymore. It's festering inside. The whole nation is literally rotting from the inside out.
So let's be super clear about this. This isn't just a collection of random, depressing stories. No way. The author has a very specific goal. He's building a case, making a powerful argument. By showing us this absolute train wreck of a society, he's basically screaming from the pages, see? This is what happens when there's no godly king to lead the people. This is total anarchy. So our first case study really shows how this kind of rot gets started. It all begins in a single household with this one guy named Micah. And Micah decides, you know what? I'm going to set up my own private shrine, my own personal religion, custom made just for me. And the whole situation is just a masterclass in moral confusion. Okay, so first, Micah steals a huge amount of silver from his own mother. Then he only gives it back because she puts a curse on the thief. He's not sorry, he's just scared. But then it gets even weirder. His mom takes the money and says she's dedicating it to the Lord. And what does she do with it? She uses it to make a forbidden carved idol. It's just a complete mess of contradictions.
And just so we're all on the same page, this is not some kind of gray area. They are shattering one of the 10 commandments. I mean, the Hebrew word for Micah's carved image is the exact same word used in Exodus right here. They know the rule. They absolutely know it, and they're choosing to break it, all while pretending they're still worshiping the one true God.
Yeah, there's a term for this. It's called religious syncretism. It's basically when you try to have your cake and eat it too, spiritually speaking. You try to blend different and often totally contradictory beliefs. They want to worship Yahweh, right? But they also want to mix in their own stuff, their own forbidden practices, like idol worship. They want God, but they want him on their own terms. Okay, so the corruption starts with a family idol, but believe me, it doesn't stop there. Things are about to escalate. A new character enters the scene, and he's about to turn Micah's little DIY shrine into a full-blown corrupt institution. So you have this young Levite, a guy from the priestly tribe, and he's just wandering around the country, totally aimless, just looking for a place to crash, a gig to land. He's basically up for grabs. And Micah spots him and makes him an offer. Hey, come be my personal priest. I'll give you a salary, some new clothes, room and board, the whole package. Just like that, religion becomes a transaction, a career move. And listen to what Micah says next. It just shows how twisted his thinking has become. He literally says, "Now I know that the Lord will prosper me because I have a Levite as a priest." Do you see the logic? He thinks that just because he's hired a quote-unquote legitimate religious professional, that God is now somehow obligated to bless him, to bless his illegal shrine and his stolen idol. He's treating God like a cosmic vending machine. Okay, so we've seen sin start in one person and then corrupt an institution. But now we're going to see how that poison spreads and infects an entire tribe. Let's talk about the tribe of Dan. So a little backstory on the tribe of Dan. They were supposed to get this piece of land right by the sea, but they couldn't conquer it. They just failed. So instead of, trusting God and trying again, they decide to take the easy way out. They send out some armed scouts to find a softer target, a new place to live that's easier to take over. And on their way north, these scouts and their posse, we're talking 600 armed men, show up at Micah's front door. Now, this is not a friendly visit. This is an overwhelming show of force.
It is pure intimidation.
So the Danites see Micah's whole religious setup and they think, hey, we want that. So they go straight to the priest for hire and they make him a better offer. It's a career promotion. Why be a priest for one guy when you can be the priest for a whole tribe? And the priest's reaction? The text says his heart was glad. He doesn't hesitate for a second. He grabs the idols, ditches Micah, and signs on with them. His loyalty? It goes to the highest bidder. Period. Naturally, Micah freaks out. I mean, they're stealing his gods and his priest. But when he protests, the Danites basically tell him, be quiet or you'll risk not only your own life, but the lives of your entire household. We have officially hit rock bottom. This is a pure might makes right philosophy. The bigger army with the bigger swords gets whatever it wants. So where does all this lead? I mean, what's the final outcome when an entire tribe decides that theft, convenience, and brute force are their guiding principles? Well, the result is absolutely brutal. And the consequences? They last for centuries.
So the Danites head north until they get to a city called Laish. And the Bible makes a point of telling us its people were quiet and unsuspecting. They were peaceful, living their lives, and the Danites, they attack without any provocation, slaughter everyone, and burn the city to the ground. Then, on the ashes, they rebuild, rename it Dan, and what do they put in the center of their new city? Micah's stolen idol. It's now their official religion.
And this right here is the really chilling part. Think about it. What started as one guy's weird, selfish, mixed-up religion in his own house became the official, state-sanctioned religion for an entire tribe of Israel. And it wasn't a fad. This corrupt shrine stood for centuries, all the way up until the nation was carried off into exile. And just like that, we've come full circle. The author has walked us through this horrific story of theft, idolatry, and savage violence for one reason: to hammer home that central point. This is the chaos you get. This is the inevitable result when there's no godly leadership and everyone becomes their own moral authority. Which leaves us with a pretty timeless and honestly unsettling question. When everyone is their own authority, when every person just does what's right in their own eyes, what's to stop any society, ancient or modern, from collapsing in on itself? What prevents this exact kind of downward spiral?